Greetings, my six-string friends. We are going to have a lot of fun today because I'm going to be taking a deep dive into what I consider to be one of the greatest one-take solos by one of my all-time favourite guitar players, Steve Lukather. Now, sometimes we're just looking for a little bit of extra sophistication beyond pentatonics and blues. And typically we look in the direction of different scales and jazz theory, but often have trouble putting it all together in a musical way. Well, Luke's refreshing approach is all about triads and chords and what he calls chord clusters. And using this method can allow us to target those all-important chord tones, especially useful when it comes to playing across chord changes. The solo we're looking at is from the Boz Scaggs track A Clue, recorded way back in 1977, in an era when guitar solos were like mini-songs in themselves. And you can really hear why this solo helped establish Luke as one of the go-to players on the LA session scene, as he had something a little bit different to say, mixing in jazz concepts with a raucous rock tone and aggressive delivery. And it still blows my mind that he was only 19 years old when he laid this down. Not only that, but in one take, with only one track remaining on the 24-track session. But he absolutely kills it with perfect intonation, beautiful vibrato and some sublime note choices. More importantly, he nails some pretty daunting chord changes, which is quite unusual for a rock player back in the late 70s. If you're looking at playing over chord changes, or perhaps venturing into jazzier vocab, then this solo is an absolute masterclass. So I'll be diving into the harmony and how Luke might have been thinking when approaching this solo. My name's Steve Woolsworth. Let's dive in. What an absolute belter of a solo. Now obviously we can learn a huge amount by dissecting and recreating this note for note, but I think the real lesson is in taking his approach and seeing how we might be able to apply it in the real world. Later in the video I'm going to play an alternate in the style of solo over the same changes to show you how you might go about doing this. So what's the starting point? Well, Luke usually had a pretty basic chord chart and obviously great ears. With a bit of harmonic theory knowledge, we can see the track itself is in C major, but the solo starts off in B flat major, weaves itself into E flat major via a tritone substitute. We've got a little half diminished substitution, and eventually it modulates back to C major. So clearly a one scale fits all approach won't work. In fact, thinking purely in scales is a little bit counterproductive, particularly when it comes to coming up with memorable lines on the fly. Luke is extraordinarily efficient when it comes to his note choices. He likes to think in what he calls chord clusters, where primarily he's thinking about the chord and then decorating it with notes in and around it. So throughout this lesson, I want you to always think about the harmony and the chords first. The harmony at the beginning of the solo is deceptively simple. It sounds like we're doing quite a dramatic key change from C major to the parallel minor of C minor. But in actual fact, this C minor chord forms the 2 chord in a 2-5-1 in the key of B flat. So that will be C minor 7, F7 to B flat major 7. Now from a scale perspective, B flat major pentatonic or B flat major would work well. But let's have a look at what Luke does. So the first bend from B flat to C, and then down to the G, can really be thought of straight out of our C minor 7 chord box. So really he's just outlining the sweet notes from the chord, namely the flat 7, root and 5th. We can quite happily think C minor pentatonic over this. We know it sounds great because it also lives inside the key of B flat major. you wanted to take this a little bit further, you could also include the ninth. Which Luke is very fond of doing over minor chords. All of this is to say that we're outlining notes around the C minor chord, rather than explicitly thinking B flat major. This is much more intentional and targeted, and means that we're much more likely to land on a great sounding note. The next lick is probably worthy of an entire lesson all by itself. Over our F9 sus, or you can think of that as an E flat over F, which is our 5 chord, Luke plays this beautiful quasi pedal steel idea. It's a beautiful idea, but it does need a lot of attention in terms of bending intonation. Now, I find it quite useful to do bending exercises on single strings just to nail the feel of the tone and semitone bends. This sus4 arpeggio idea is something you'll hear Luke use all of the time, and I'm pretty sure this is straight out of the Larry Carlton playbook, because Luke was a massive fan of Larry Carlton's work with Steely Dan. Now, obviously it sounds great over an F chord for an F sus sound. But it also serves a dual function, because we can also think of it being built from the 5th of an underlying major 7th chord. So we can also play this same idea over B flat major 7, the 5th of B flat being F. And this will give us a really nice B flat major 9, B flat sus sound. You hear this exact same idea right at the end of the solo, but this time over an A flat major 7 chord. In this case, he's up a 5th, so E flat. If you want to know a bit more about this, then check out my Larry Carlton super arpeggio video. Next comes a really interesting chord. The piano is playing an E dominant 9 flat 5. Now on guitar, this is quite an effort. But if we distill down basically what we're hearing, it's this, which essentially is giving us an augmented sound which we can easily move around in major 3rd intervals. This resolves down a semitone to an E flat major 7 chord. This is what's known as a tritone substitution. Again, quite jazzy and a potential scale banana skin if we overthink the theory. But the Luke approach is much, much simpler. Just see the chord and play the notes out of it. So we've got this shape here. And all Luke's doing is connecting up the flattened 5th and flat 7th notes. If we look a little bit deeper, these 3 notes are straight out of the E Wholetone Scale. Now, I don't know whether Luke was thinking this or not, but without going too deep into augmented whole-tone scale theory, I want to give you a simple way of adapting this in a really effective way. If we move the same 3 notes around in major 3rd intervals, we're effectively going through all the different inversions of our augmented chord. So we'll hit all of the sweet notes from inside the chord. if we add the D below, hopefully you'll be able to see the connection with that nasty piano chord that we looked at earlier on. This is a very effective shape that we can easily move around in major third intervals and sounds great without getting buried in scale theory. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to give the channel some love with a like and subscribe. And as always, you can find the tab over on my support page. We're resolving to E flat major 7, so we see Luke decorating notes in and around an E flat major 7 chord. If you want to take this further, perhaps target that E flat major 7 with a G minor triad. We should be able to see that G minor triad residing inside of that E flat major 7 chord. As I said earlier, this way of viewing triads is a really useful way of navigating chord changes, as we'll see in the next part. So E flat major 7 resolves up very simply to an E half diminished or E minor 7 flat 5 chord. Now we can think of this half diminished chord as a substitute for a C9 chord. And we typically expect to find this in chord progressions like this. This is a 1-6-2-5 in the key of E flat. Now we'll get on to where this half diminished chord goes in a minute. But for the time being, I want you to see this G minor triad that exists in both of these two chords. As we can create really memorable lines just by using variations of this arpeggio alone. Whilst we're thinking in G minor, we can even think G minor pentatonic, which sounds great over this half diminished chord. But we can also add a little tweak to this to include the E, so this targets the chord a little bit better. In reality, Luke is targeting chord tones, the flat and third and the flat and fifth, with that A in between. So we can either think of it coming out of that half diminished chord, or we can think of it as simply decorating that G minor triad, similar to those ideas that we looked at over C minor at the beginning. Next comes A flat major 7, which is essentially just a substitute for an F minor 9 chord. And we'd normally expect to hear some kind of 5 chord going to E flat major 7. But instead of going back to E flat, we do a bit of a left turn and return back to the original key of C major. And again, we do this via a 5 chord. So here we're using a G9 sus, or F over G, and that resolves nicely to C major 7. So here it looks like Luke is playing straight out of C and then resolving beautifully to the major 7 of that C major 7 chord. Something that you could think about over this G9 sus chord, or for that matter any G7 or G Mixolydian vamp, are 3 arpeggios: F major, A minor, and C major, as they all express the sound of this chord without playing a scale. So I'm going to take a pass at this and see if I can put something together using the concepts that we've been talking about. I think it's also worth trying to put in some classic Lukisms, including pedal notes and the little finger Rosanna bend, so keep an eye out for those. Hopefully you heard a lot of the ideas from the lesson coming together. Remember, this is all about anchoring yourself to the underlying chord and really understanding the movement of the harmony. And this should mean less tendency to noodle up and down scale shapes and instead play more meaningful and expressive lines. As always, you can find the tabs on my support page, and you might find this a useful way to dig into the concepts a little bit more deeply. And finally, let me know down in the comments what your favourite Luke solo is.